And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Palau.
Mr. President, Secretary General, Excellencies, colleagues, Palau aligns itself with the statement made by Fiji as chair of the Pacific Island Forum. We additionally make the following statement in our national capacity. It's been 8 months since the war in Ukraine started, and we're convening this emergency session against the backdrop of brutal missile attacks against civilian infrastructure and cities across Ukraine that have killed many innocent civilians. Palau strongly condemns these attacks and would like to remind us that indiscriminate attacks on innocent civilians are war crimes. Palau also condemns and unequivocally rejects the illegal attempted annexation by Russia of Ukraine's Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions, in addition to the autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. We do not recognize the sham referenda that Russia uses to justify it. At the start of this emergency session, Russia attempted to blur transparency, then sow confusion into a democratic process, and when that didn't work, they attempted to silence healthy debate by member states before a historic vote. If we were all a bit confused at the onset of this session, one can only imagine how these referendums were conducted. In addition to witnessing the horrors of war in Ukraine, we've also felt the pangs of war in our own countries. Children and families are going hungry from food inflation. People are unable to get to work due to rising energy prices. In countries like ours, hotter than ever as a result of climate change, people are at times unable to cool themselves because our energy prices have shot through the roof. And in temperate countries, people, families, children will suffer from the bitter chill of winter because they will have no heat. And it goes on to show that in our increasingly globalized world, that we are one, and an attack on one of our member states is an attack on us all. And it is those who are the most vulnerable, those who have already felt the heavy beating of the COVID pandemic, get another hit to their lives without respite. Today, I'd like to tell you a story about an incredible individual I recently held the distinct pleasure of meeting, Louis Pugh. Louis swims in the most vulnerable ecosystems on Earth to call for their protection. He was the first to swim across the North Pole and the first to swim the full length of the English Channel to convince the UK to join the 30 by 30 initiative. In 2015, he took on the challenge of swimming in the Ross Sea in Antarctica in an attempt to convince Russia to sign on to the treaty to turn the Ross Sea into the world's largest marine protected area, an initiative that Russia had been the only holdout on for 5 years, and he did it in nothing but a Speedo, a swim cap, and goggles. On his experience of swimming in the Ross Sea, he quotes, "At negative 37 degrees Celsius, which is negative 37 degrees Fahrenheit, the air was so much colder than the freezing sea. Each time I lifted my arm out of the water into that air, it was a drop of more than 35 degrees Celsius. The pain in my arm was more excruciating than the burning agony I felt in the rest of my body. With each stroke, I watched myself freeze. After 100 meters, the first digits of my fingers were completely white. After 200 meters, the white had spread up to the second knuckle. At 300 meters, I couldn't feel my hands. I had undertaken the most southern swim in the world. On that day, my message about the desperate need to protect the Ross Sea came to life." Pugh then flew from Antarctica directly to Moscow and began a 2-year process of trying to convince the Kremlin to join the treaty. Because of his swim, he received widespread media attention in Russia and went on a highly publicized tour. He was then able to become friends with Russian hockey legend and sports minister Slava Fedosov, and his message got through to the Kremlin and to Putin, who, after blocking the treaty for 5 years, signed on. When he received the phone call that Russia would sign the treaty, he said it was the happiest day of his life. His dedication had helped create the world's largest marine protected area. I tell this story because those of us who are fortunate enough to be here don't have to swim in sub-zero waters to reach the halls of power. But to enact change, we have to do things that are uncomfortable, to have the hard conversations, to push our leaders to act and attempt to broker peace, and do what we can so that our individual actions aggregate into a collective will that can't be ignored, because it is our collective energy that will shift the world. My call to action today is directed at the member states who have remained neutral, those who've chosen not to vote or to abstain. The reasons are varied. Some don't want to be embroiled in what's been touted as a geopolitical war of influence. Some have strong socioeconomic ties to Russia. Some have said that they want to remain neutral to allow Russia to be able to come back to dialogue. However, after 8 months of bloodshed, which has been escalating by the day, we all know that that's ever more unlikely. So Palau asks for your vote today in favor of the draft resolution to codify the promise that we don't live in an age where we allow countries to annex other countries through sham referendums, to uphold the basic principles of the UN Charter that govern relations between nations in the 21st century. That includes respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, the notion that nations don't simply redraw borders or make decisions at the expense of their neighbors because they are larger or more powerful. For those countries who are close friends with Russia, we say that in life, true friends are those who have the courage and conviction to tell you the truth, to urge you back on the right path when you've gone wrong, even when it's uncomfortable. Only through collective action can we change the trajectory of the war and allow the world to get back on the path to peace, not just for the benefit of Ukrainians, but also for those most vulnerable in all our countries who have been made to suffer as a result of China's aggression. It's often been said that moments that challenge us the most define us. What will be the legacy of the United Nations? The water will be cold, but let us all jump in. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Palau, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of